So today we're going to talk a little bit about one really important topic, which is why is it so difficult to eat less? Now, here's a fundamental problem, or I don't like to use the word problem, I'd like to say reality. In order for someone who needs to lose some weight, lose some body fat, there must be some degree of deficit. Now, that deficit has to come from one of two places. Either metabolically, from doing more activity, building more muscle, in the process of doing more activity, or eating less. Now, the best results, the most long-term results will always come from a combination of two. But with a combination of both of them, there's always that one common component that can't be steps, which is that you have to eat less. Now, when we talk about diets, the word diet is essentially, and most people understand, flawed, because no one wants to really go on a diet. A diet's not something that's really useful. A diet implies some temporary change in your eating habits that's going to obviously bring about a temporary change in your physical appearance. So, even in the bodybuilding world, people will diet for a 3-month period usually, sometimes 6-month period, going to look really, really good. They'll reduce their eating, how many calories they take in, they'll increase their activity level, and they'll try to get as lean as possible for a competition. And some people do it because they're getting ready for a film, or photography shoots, shoots for social media, but those are temporary fixes. And the problem is that we kind of fixate on people who look fantastic for short periods of time and kind of get this sense that, they always look that way. When the reality is that most people don't. It's a temporary thing. It's a diet that you're going on. And most of those people will give dietary advice. You get advice as to what they did to look fantastic for a short period of time. The problem is, when we think about weight loss, outside of bodybuilding, outside of social media, outside of fitness stars and fitness personalities, we come into the reality of weight loss, which is most people don't want to look good 2 weeks out of the year for photo shoots or for a competition. They want to look good all the time. And for them, the idea of doing a temporary diet doesn't really work in that, number one, it's something that's going to be transient, and any results that you get, it's usually not going to be something that's sustainable. And the problem with sustainability with most diets is, how do you continuously eat less? The activity, most people can have no problem, getting used to exercising on a regular basis, but how do you eat less? And why is it so hard to eat less? Is there a trick? Is there a hack that you can use to make it such that you can eat less consistently? Because there are some people, myself hopefully being one of them, I'm saying hopefully because I'm 46 turning 47 right now, and I hope to be as lean as I am when I'm in my 70s and my 80s and stick to the program and protocol I've been following for the past several decades. But most people want to be in that place. Want to be in that place where you're lean all the time. And in order to be lean all the time, and to get to a place where you're lean all the time, it means that somewhere along the line, to get there, you're going to have to eat less. Now, when I say less, I mean less in terms of calorie intake, not necessarily volume per se. But one of the problems with approaching weight loss is that nutrition today is so focused on today. It's so focused on modern foods. It's so focused on trying to figure out a way to help people maintain and sustain a healthy body weight, eating modern foods in modern environments. And the conversation isn't really about why it's so difficult for us to eat less. Why is it so much almost impossible for people to resist those temptations to eat those high-calorie foods that they know they shouldn't eat, that every fiber of their being is screaming at them not to eat. Whereas another part of them is, overwhelmingly compelled to eat it. Why is that? Why is it so hard to eat less? I think one of the issues is that in order to solve a problem, we use the word problem here, you have to first understand what the problem is. I don't really see the problem I said, but what the issue here is that we're going up against something that's fundamentally part of what it means to be human. Actually, fundamentally what it means to be part of any living organism. See, one of the key elements that separates us as human beings from other animals is the fact that we don't spend all of our time, most of our time, looking for food. Most animals, across the board, spend the majority of their lifetime looking for food. There is some time for sleep. There is some time for reproduction. In some higher animals, there's even some time for some play. But all of it is eclipsed by that need, that consistent need to look for food. That drive to look for food, to look for food. One of the reasons why we as humans have a civilization, have art developed the way it is, have technology developed the way it is because we are no longer chained to the need to constantly devote most of our time to simply looking for food and sustaining ourselves. Now, if we think about the issue of weight loss and the issue of overeating, how to stop overeating, we have to look at our ancestral past. We have to look at that makes all of us common. We all have in common the fact that we all come from the same ancestral environment, and we all, somewhere down the line, have the same basic ancestors. And those ancestors were shaped tremendously, almost, in fact, I wouldn't say tremendously, I'd say completely by the environment in which they developed. Now, a quick understanding of evolution, and a simple overview of it is, evolution is how an organism develops in an environment and adapts in an environment so as to allow the organism to live long enough to be able to reproduce. That's it. That's really, really it. Any organism that adapts in a way that allows it to live long enough to be able to continually reproduce in a particular environment will be evolutionarily successful, and that species will survive. Any organism that's unable to adapt to the environment will not be able to live long enough to reproduce, or to continually do so, and the species will eventually die out and become extinct. That's the same pressure, environmental pressure, that our ancestors faced. And obviously, because we are here, they overcame. Now, let's go back to what it means to be alive and to be an animal. Let's look at our closest relatives on the evolutionary scale. Let's look at the apes. Apes spend most of their time eating. Most of the time eating and looking for food. Now, the reason why they spend so much time looking for food and eating, and not just apes, pretty much all of them, is because in nature there are no real dense high calorie foods that you commonly come across. Most of the foods you come across are very low in energy, extremely high in fiber sometimes, and even with animal protein sources, the fat levels are never really very high. So because there's never a large amount of calories in one place, every organism in nature that doesn't have supermarkets, restaurants, and food factories and food industries to make food for it has to keep on looking for food. So there are two problems there. Number one, first off, all the food that an animal has to find in the wild has to actually find it, either hunt it or gather it. And any food it finds is not going to be really high in calories, so it has to constantly be looking for food. Now, somewhere along the line, a primate was able to begin having access to more animal proteins by the development and the use of fire, which allowed it to eat a lot more and ingest a lot more calories and get a lot more protein than other animals would, because fire created access to far more proteins, which then went on to help it build bigger brains proportional to the size of its skull, which gave it more intelligence. That primate I'm talking about is our common ancestor. Now, those particular early humans were doing their best to try to figure out how they can get as much food as possible by doing as little work as possible. Because you can imagine how unstable it would have been. Now, we talk about climate change, and at the time when human beings were becoming human beings, about 200,000 plus years ago, Earth was very much in upheaval. There were major shifts in weather patterns and climate patterns as we transitioned from an ice age. Really major changes going on. So food wasn't always, and then you're talking about 200,000 years since then, food has not always been something that we can easily get. Today it's something we take for granted. Restaurants, supermarkets, you go online, order something, food's at your door in a couple minutes. But our ancestors didn't have any of that. They had to figure out ways to do their best to try to get as much food as possible. But they were, nonetheless, spending most of their time as hunter-gatherers, hunting and gathering. Yes, there was some time for other things, but most of the time was spent doing hunting and gathering. Now, at some point, agriculture started, and agriculture allowed our ancestors the ability to stay in one place and have a stable food supply that they can kind of rely on. Now, they would supplement it in the beginning with some hunting. You'd do some hunting, but you'd also have some backup crops that would kind of supplement your diet. So you had a fairly stable food source on a regular basis. As time went on, agriculture became even more dominant. Hunting became less and less, and more of us and more of our ancestors relied almost primarily on agriculture to sustain ourselves. And that kept on up until the Industrial Revolution, when there was a major switch where most of us didn't have to be doing agriculture anymore. Very less and less people could do agriculture because we were able to, in each phase, create more condensed foods that are very concentrated in calories. Things like cakes, things like cookies, things like breakfast cereals, all those things are really high calorie foods. Even the domesticated animals that we have. If we think about what it was to consume an animal in the wild, and even today in the wild, those animals are nothing like the domesticated animals we eat today. The animals we eat today are much higher in fats. They are fed and bred to be much, much fatter than what you would find in the wild. And they also have a far less activity level. And just like if you compare someone who's on the couch all day long to someone who's out there running track all day long, there's a very big difference in body composition. And think about domesticated animals as the couch potato, and think about wild animals as kind of like track athletes. Because those animals out there have to constantly look for food and search for food. Whereas domesticated animals don't have to do that. They're a little bit like us in terms of they have a constant food supply that we supply to them. And such, just like us, they eat and they eat and they eat and they eat more than they should. coming right to that point right there. So it's important to understand that we had a major shift over the past several 100,000 years from where we started off to somewhere 100,000 years ago when agriculture started, to the 1800s when we had the Industrial Revolution, and with even more modern foods. We've come a long way, and coming so far, we've come further and further from the shackle of having to spend all our time looking for food. So we no longer have to dedicate our lives to looking for food, and less of us on the planet have to do so. Now, if you're in an undeveloped country, you still probably do have to spend most of your life looking for food, unfortunately. But because so many people are able to not have that chain on them, they have more time to develop the arts, develop technology, develop, social systems, develop, rockets, develop airplanes. All these things come because we're not tied to this one activity of what we need to do to stay alive. Make sure we have enough food for today, and to make sure we have enough food for our young. We no longer have to do that. Our food stability is much, much better. But keep in mind, from an ancestral point of view, those ancestors who, in that environment, didn't have that drive to constantly be seeking food, probably would not have survived. I would say probably, they would not have survived. They did not survive. No organism in that environment, no wild environment, doesn't have a drive to constantly look for food when the food sources are all low calorie, would survive. Remember again, we look at the movies. In the movies, someone goes out, they're hunting, and they kill a wild animal, and they have enough food, and they're okay. It's not very much. Wild animals, like I said before, are high in protein, but they're very low in fat. And the fats are really important. Your body needs fats. So you need a lot. It's not like, one wild animal will do it for one person, sustain it for a long period of time. It won't. Most of the fat you get in the organ meats, the muscle meats that we're so used to eating today, don't have much fat at all, and it's predominantly most of what the animal consists of. And eating it, not having enough fats, you'd still end up being malnourished, and eventually you still will die. You need fat, you need calories. And so we have that drive. And those who didn't have that drive obviously didn't make it. They wouldn't have survived, they wouldn't have reproduced. Our ancestors did survive, did reproduce. But, here's the big but. Our bodies are no longer in that environment. We no longer inhabit an environment where we're terrified of what we need to do right now to make sure we have enough food for tomorrow. We're in a food environment where we have a superabundance of food. We have more food than we need most of the time. Like, really, we do. We eat more food than our bodies need. Whereas, if we go back, not even to 100,000 years, 2,000 years ago, you could even say several hundred years ago, in most parts of the world, we still were in a position where we didn't have that much food. It's not been, for most people on the planet, a place where food has been abundant for the majority of our time on the planet. Only fairly recently, the very small number of developed countries is beginning to be in a place where we have that superabundance of food, which is why we have the obesity problems we have, and why it's so hard to lose weight. But I'm not going to get ahead of myself. The issue is, while we've come so far in terms of our food stability, that drive that we have to keep on and constantly eat, that drive that our primate cousins have to keep on eating, we still have it because we have the same bodies of our ancestors. It hasn't changed. Our bodies don't know that we can get food by clicking on a mouse. We can get food by going to a restaurant. We can get food by going to a supermarket. We can get food from, numerous sources, and that the food that we eat is much higher in calories than the food that we were exposed to in the environment that created us, that made us human today. And that's our major problem. You see, when we talk about food moderation and our ability to regulate food, humans don't have one. We don't have a built-in sense of when we're eating too much. We don't. We never did because we never needed it. For all this time on the planet, the foods that we were eating were, if it was plant food and a carbohydrate, it was plant-based carbohydrates. It was high in fiber. It was high in bulk. If it was a fruit, it was high in seeds. It was not very sweet, and it didn't have that much calories in it. So you had to eat a lot, quite a lot, to keep on getting enough to sustain the amount of calories and energy of what you need to survive. You have to keep on eating and eating and eating. Fast forward to today, you have foods like I said, cakes, cookies, chocolate, pizza, fast foods, even things like milk, which was something that came from the agricultural onwards. We have processed forms and forms of like ice creams and yogurts. We have, instead of just fruits, we have fruit juices. We're able to consume large amounts of calories in one short period of time. And our bodies simply aren't designed to do this. It doesn't know what to do. There is no stop for eating for human beings. We're designed to eat and eat and eat. By the time you've ever overeaten, and I'm sure everybody at some point has, you kind of realize that you've overeaten when you've passed the point. You don't say, oh, I'm eating and I'm feeling like I'm overeating. It's you're eating and then you realize, oh, wait a minute, I've eaten more than I should. That's because we don't have that stopgap. That signal from your brain to your stomach that says, all right, that's enough, stop. It's a slow signal because in our ancestral environment, the environment our bodies are built to live in, it never happens. You need to eat a lot. And your body needs to keep on, encouraging you to eat to get enough calories in a low calorie environment. We come from a predominantly low calorie environment. That's our problem. Now, when someone gets lost, when someone is stranded somewhere in the wild, that need and that drive to keep on eating sustains us. It keeps us alive. But that's not our regular environment. Our regular environment is one where there's a lot of food. There's more food than you need. There's always more food than you need. And so you can eat more food. You can always overeat. If your body needs 2,000 calories a day to maintain homeostasis, to either gain weight or lose weight, which is, a fairly adequate number for most people, you can easily blow that away with, 2 servings of a dessert, or, a couple lattes at the coffee shop. Calories are really, really easy to come by in our environment, which is why it's important to understand that moderation is not something that we should be looking at as a solution. It's hard to hear because we want to eat everything. We want to be able to enjoy, all foods in moderation. But the problem is that it's not possible. Now, it's extremely profitable for the food industry who tells you, oh, you can have those junk foods in moderation. Just moderate yourself. But like I said, there is nothing in us as human beings that can allow us to moderate high calorie foods, especially when they're hyperpalatable, meaning that they stimulate our senses the same way that drugs do. Drugs like cocaine and opioids, it's the same centers of your brain being stimulated when you're taking them in. So if you find yourself overeating or eating things you shouldn't be eating on your diet and they're processed foods, I think it's important to start with not beating yourself up. It's important to have an internal dialogue with yourself and start talking about the fact that this is part of what it is to be human. We're designed to eat. We're designed to eat, eat, eat. Not eating is not really a common human attribute. We're not designed to eat and have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and then stop. We're not designed to do that. We're designed to eat and keep on going. Now, there are a few individuals who won the genetic lottery or behavioral lottery, and they don't tend to eat that much and they can do really well regulating, but they're a very tiny percentage of the population. Just like the tiny percentage of the population that wins the lottery, very tiny, it's kind of people who can eat and moderate what they're eating. Most people can't. Most people can't. I'll say it again. Most people can't. I can't overstate that. No matter how hard you try, it's not going to work. Now, in the art of war, there's the idea that if you know your enemy and know yourself, in 100 battles, you will always be victorious. And it's the same here. If you understand that the reason why you're eating more than you should is because you're human, and it's a natural thing to do so in the face of the foods that you're presented with, it gives you more perspective. It starts taking the emotional guilt out of it. It starts taking the idea that somehow you're failing out of it. That's important because it's not useful. It's totally not useful. It's because the worse you feel about a food that you ate, it's the more you're thinking about the food. The more you keep on thinking about the food, you're more likely to keep on eating that particular food. It's a vicious cycle, but one more cycle in there to keep us as humans eating. We're designed to keep on eating. It's not your body's against you and trying to sabotage your weight loss efforts. That's not what it is at all. It's that the regulation of our calorie and energy intake doesn't come from us. It's supposed to come from our foods. If you're eating even a modern food like a chicken breast, how many chicken breasts can you really eat? If you're eating a modern food like an apple, how many apples can you eat? If you're eating a modern whole food like potatoes, how many potatoes can you eat? On the other side, if we go to processed versions of those foods, things start getting a little different. How many chicken nuggets can you eat? Quite a lot. A chicken nugget is a processed version of chicken breast. Not the same thing. It's processed. It's designed to make you eat more. How many apples can you eat? Not much. How much apple juice can you take? The equivalent of several dozen apples. But that's just how it is. It's concentrated. It's all about concentrating our calories. How many potatoes can you eat? Not that many. How many potatoes and potato chips can you eat? Lots. It's the same thing. Keep in mind, it's not that humans somewhere along the line decided to create these horrible foods that hurt you and make it hard for you to lose weight and keep on gaining weight. It's that we've always been struggling to get to a balance point where we have enough food so we don't have to worry about our next meal. The Industrial Revolution was about creating foods that were high in calories and dense, easy to carry with you, easy to store, to try to deal with an ever-increasing population of humans on the planet. Yes, there are some negatives to it as far as what it does, but on the other side, it did allow a lot of our forefathers to be alive, whereas if those foods didn't exist, we probably wouldn't be alive. But we're in a place today where we can do better. We can make better choices, especially in developed countries. We have the choice of being able to say, I would like to eat this, I would like to eat that. And in terms of how do you not overeat, how do you maintain a moderation by using your foods to moderate your intake, it's simple. It's very simple. It's alarmingly simple. All you have to do is just eat whole foods. That's it. No processed food. If you're having any kind of processed food, it should be minimally processed food. Like minimally processed means something like oat bran cereal or oatmeal. That's it. You don't need processed food in your life because processed food are foods that we are simply biologically not designed to find. Because those foods didn't evolve with us. Think of our evolutionary progression as something very much unique to us. It's not just us, it's our environment that evolved. We evolved with our environment. We evolved an environment around us. We created our own microenvironments with our foods. The foods that we eat today are foods that we developed. Apples, oranges, mangoes, bananas, they're great. But if we go into the wild, you won't find anything that looks like them. The sweetest fruit you'd ever find in the wild is about as sweet as a carrot. And they're high in seeds. They're much higher in fiber and indigestible bulk. And they also tend to have really thick skins. So they're hard to get to. They're hard to eat. You have to eat a lot of them to get the same calories. So what our ancestors did, anybody who's into agriculture or farming knows this, they kept on modifying them until they became the thin skin, easy to consume foods that we have today. But we evolved with those foods. We have been eating those foods for thousands and thousands of years with no problem. We can eat those foods. The problem comes in the processing. So if you're eating foods, think about your foods being what you're going to use to stop your intake, how much you eat. Now in the beginning, it's going to be hard because here's the thing. You're going to have to eat a lot of it because you're designed to eat a lot. When I tell people I eat 5 times a day, sometimes 6 times a day, it sounds excessive, like, oh, you eat a lot of times. Well, it's because the food that I consume aren't that high in calories, and so in order to get the amount of calories and energy my body needs to sustain itself, I have to eat a lot of food. That's simple. It's not some bodybuilding logic or anything else. It's just simply a matter that you need to keep on eating. And you're going to have the urge to keep on eating all the time. It doesn't really go away. It doesn't. It's with you. That urge you have, you want something to eat. If you're eating the right foods, you're much less likely to be overeating. Much less likely. And you can still overdo it, but you have to consciously kind of like make yourself overdo it. But in, let's say, what I call cruise mode, where you're not really thinking too much about it, if you're eating the foods you should be eating, you'll naturally moderate your intake. That puts you in a better place in terms of you're not on a diet, because a diet, like I said, is a temporary thing. It's transient. Its good effects are transient. Its bad effects can last pretty long because you remember what it was to have lost the weight, to be at the lower weight, and you're going to struggle each time to get back there. And eventually, most people just give up. You say, you know what, screw it. I keep on trying to lose weight. I can't keep on eating that small amount of food. Start eating more, I put the weight back on, and it's that up and down cycle. This way is a different way. The idea is you're not trying to use your willpower to dominate your foods. You're using your foods to dominate and moderate your intake. There's only so much wood bran cereal I can eat. There's only so much chicken breast I can eat. There's only so many sweet potatoes I can eat. There's only so much fish I can eat. There's only so many vegetables that I can consume. And even with fruits, there's only so much fruit I can eat. And the thing about fruit too is that, we live in a world where we have fruit all the time, all year round. You can get every fruit everywhere if you live in the United States because people are importing them from different parts of the world. But with food, there has to be some moderation because you can overdo it. But with everything else, more or less, nature and us have a really good relationship. So I think one of the ways to build a good pathway towards controlling how much you eat and not overeating, but also developing a healthy and seamless relationship between you and your food, where you don't have that antagonistic sense of this food is, going to destroy me or make me fat or none of that. It's a nice balance and easy way to focus on a long-term solution to losing weight and maintaining a healthy weight. It takes away all of that anxiety that you have about how much you should not eat. And it also takes away the likelihood. It reduces ridiculously the likelihood of you overeating. It will. Now, that being said, it all starts with a belief. You have to believe that you can do it. It's not going to be easy. It's just like if you're trying to go from Earth to space. It needs a lot of energy to get that rocket out of our atmosphere up into space. So once you get into space, not much energy needed at all. No more gravity holding you back. So you keep on going and going and going. It's the same way with change in how you eat. It's going to be hard. Any change in your body is met with resistance. Because your body, again, doesn't know that we're in a modern environment. It thinks whenever you change your eating habits and start eating less, that you're going to starve. There's going to be some stress to go through. But if you focus on eating non-processed foods, only whole foods, in time, it gets easier. It will eventually get easier, but you have to keep on going. A lot of the pressure may not even be from your stomach, it might be from your friends who eat differently and persuade you to try to eat what they eat. But if you stay with it, stick with it, you'll be surprised how far you can get and how easy it comes. And you get to a place where, like me, like I always say, I don't eat the way I eat because I think about it. I just eat the way I eat because it feels really good. And if you eat only whole foods too, it'll feel really good. So I'm looking forward to seeing your success. And if you have any questions, always feel free to contact me. You can contact me on Instagram at Naturally Intense. You can go to our website, naturallyintense.net. There's tons of articles about just things like this at naturallyintense.net/blog. And you can always feel free to contact me directly because I'm always happy to answer any questions that you have. I've been truly blessed over the past 30 years as a personal trainer, being able to help so many people and also amass so much information in how to help people lose weight in a sustainable and healthy and natural way. It's a blessing. And with any blessing, it's not something you hold for yourself, it's something you want to give as much as you can. Now, I can only do but so much with myself. So what my mission into that this life has to be is to make sure that I spend my life doing my best, take all those lessons I've been so fortunate to have learned over the years and share it with you. And I hope that you take those lessons as well when you're successful with your weight loss and you get into a healthy weight and share with others as well. That's how it's supposed to be. That's also part of it to be human. Thanks so much for listening and Excelsior.